a successful producer, documentary maker, writer, but he's here because we met baking cakes on the forthcoming series of Celebrity Bake Off. And we can't really talk about it, can we?
No. We've signed a non-disclosure.
It's out in a few months' time, so we can't really say any more, other than the fact that during the process of making this programme, I discovered that Greg really does have some big ways in which he wants to change the world, because we're going to talk really today about death. Mm-hmm. And it's even odd saying that.
Yeah, sitting in a darkened room.
Sitting in a darkened room, just
both
saying,
wearing black. And I have my scythe.
Saying, let's talk about death. And the reason for that is that you published a book of a blog which was written by your sister Clare, who died just over 2 years ago, which she started and you completed. And it was about her experience of cancer, and you took it right up to the end. And you formed some big ideas in the process of this, didn't you?
Yeah. I never thought that words were my medium. Oddly, as an actor, words are my medium, but words that someone else has written that I'm interpreting and trying to make my own. And living with, obviously, an Oscar-winning screenwriter, I always shied away from the written word. And I found myself, when I was the primary carer for my sister, I lived with her for the last 10 weeks of her life, and she had no one else around her. She didn't want anyone else. Seeing how she had become with this illness that was just ravaging her. And towards the end, because of the weight of the disease and the weight of the opiates, she was probably not with us for 22 hours of the day. And yet I had to be there at all times. And I'd got her a little bell push by the side of her bed, and I carried around the other side of it, like one of these door chime things. And finding myself in this enforced stasis for just short of 3 months, both within the obviously the fantastically difficult headspace of watching the closest person you have in your life dying, but also feeling trapped and incapable of doing anything at all. All I could do was think about where we were as a brother and sister, and think about where we were within the medicalization of all things, and then think about where we were more societal in terms of our relationship with life-limiting illness and our relationship with death. And I sort of equated it to you have a jam jar of seawater with you the whole time, and you're always moving, and it's always fuzzy, it's always opaque. You can never quite see through it because we're always on the move. If you put the jam jar down, after a while it settles, and there's some sort of clarity to a situation, and you see the sedimentation of things. And I suppose that's what happened with me over those weeks. I started to see some form of clarity, and I realized that as a society we have either forgotten this language or have never been taught it, the language of death, the language of grief. And I suppose I've made it slightly my purpose in life now is to just talk about it, to bring it out into the open, because sunlight is the great sanitizer of things. And the difficulty when you start talking about it at all, people go, oh, it's morbid. One thing we know, the only thing we know, is we're going to die. That's all. I had this wonderful woman I've been doing some work with called Catherine Mannix. She was a palliative consultant at the Marie Curie in Newcastle. And she wrote a wonderful book called With the End in Mind, about her time dealing with people dying. And she said, there are 2 days in our lives that are under 24 hours. The day we were born and the day we die. And that just brought things home to me so much. We spend so much time concentrating on that first day and try and ignore the second.
And as a society, we're very well set up for thinking about birth and maternity and paternity and the time we give people and the thought we give people.
And also boiling that down, there are statutory rights when you're a new parent. There are statutory rights for leave that both the mother and the father can have, that can be extended at will. There is no statutory guidance for bereavement at all. And we have to be better. We have to be better at that. I mean, one of the things which, of course, you can never know is when someone's going to die. You have a fairly shrewd idea when someone's going to be born. There are the signs. There are similar signs to death. And a palliative doctor, or these wonderful new breed of people called the death doulas, the midwives to help you across that threshold, as there are midwives to help us over the threshold of birth. There are very set passages within the dying process.
Which most people would have absolutely no idea
Which
about.
most people have no idea. And I had no idea about at all. So we know reasonably when someone will die. And we have to be able to be slightly more grown up about having those conversations.
I mean, I find talking about death sort of impossible and scary, because I've never really had anybody very close to me die. I mean, I've had lots of friends die, and I've been to funerals of friends, and it's been awful. But that very close family relationship, you know, touch wood, I haven't had. And so I slightly live in perpetual fear of the moment it happens. You know, both my parents, my wife's parents, they're all still going. And there's always that sort of, how long are we lucky for?
Yeah.
Were you at all prepared? You know, had you been through anything like this before, Claire?
When I was at university, my closest friend at the time was killed when we were all in our mid-20s. And that really, really shook me. He was a boy who really lived life to the absolute fullest, and he and I were, we would climb together. We climbed waterfalls and did all the proper boy stuff, and he was drowned. He was killed at a time when we were all just starting out. We were all just starting to find out who we all were and what we wanted to do and how we were able to make a living and how difficult it can be being a grown-up. And I think that more than anything made me realize that it is fantastically easy to be killed. We have this life that, of course, when we're young, we think we're immortal. And to have one of our compatriots taken from us when we still are in that immortal state pulled me up short. And it made me, I suppose, more aware of not planning, of not trying to pursue any agenda, because at any moment the bus can broadside us. Now, that's not to say that you don't try as hard as you can on whatever you're doing at the time, but having some sort of overview. And in my game, people say all the time, it's good for your career. This is a good career move. Do that for your... No one knows anything. You know, William Goldman, who wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and one of the greatest books ever written on screenwriting, called Adventures in the Screen Trade, coined this phrase about Hollywood. You have to remember, no one knows anything. And that's the point. No one knows. No one knows if the $250 million film will be the biggest film ever made. It probably normally isn't. It's normally the $2 million film that becomes the blockbuster of the year.
Does it change the way you approach those sorts of things? Because whenever I've seen you before, I've always thought you don't seem to take acting that seriously.
No.
You know, as a profession. Which is odd for somebody who studied acting and went to a grand institution.
I think one of the things that an early death in one's life, and I suppose I must have had this coming through as a child anyway, and one of the things I've tried to learn is to have as soft a grip as possible on things. If you're going to get Buddhist about it, all we have is impermanence. We get into trouble when we grip too hard. We get into trouble when we want things never to change, because all we know is things will change, and the biggest change, the end change, is death. And I think for my health, I've realized over the years that having as soft a grip as possible on things is the healthiest for me. Now, that does not mean that I do not do it 100% to my ability when I'm doing a piece of work. I might find the overall idea of being an actor slightly flippant, but my God, I'm absolutely there and 100% professional when I'm working.
But the soft grip certainly doesn't apply to the people in your life, does it?
I think it does.
Really?
I think it does.
What, you're ready for loss? Is that what we have to be if we're going to be okay with death, that we have to be ready to lose people?
I think you absolutely do. Or I think I absolutely do. I know the times in the past where I've become completely unstuck is when my grip has been too hard, because then you start getting into all of that codependent nonsense that an awful lot of us bring, and expecting the things that we're not able to give ourselves from the other. If we're able, as much as we can, to self-soothe, self-love, self-appreciate, then whatever comes in from the outside is just a really nice extra, but it's not the be-all and end-all of everything, because we can give that to ourselves. And I think having a soft touch on anything, for me, is the secret.
Because I sort of wanted to do a little dogleg into family and your approach to family, because I think it's all related.
Yeah.
Because you have this remarkable life in which you and your sister and your wife, Dame Emma Thompson, in case you haven't all worked out who we were talking about, and her family all kind of live together. What's the setup?
It's extraordinary. Mrs. Wise, Dame Mrs. Wise, has moved about 100 yards in 60 years. She was born at the bottom of the street, then moved to the top of the street. She now lives in the middle of the street. It's how people always used to live in the past, but just where we are now, it's anathema, really. Her mum lives directly opposite us. Our son and his new wife live 5 doors up. My sister lived 10 doors down. Our best chums live both 2 doors down and just up. It's a proper community.
Joint family system, isn't it?
And
I mean, my
how-
mum would be listening
yeah.
to this going, well, that's how we should all live.
Well, it's how we always used to live, and you know, should's a difficult word. It's how we all could live, and I explore it a bit in the book, and I say that what we have been sold as the archetype is the nuclear family, is mum, dad, and 2.2 kids, and the black lab, and the Volvo, or whatever it might look like. It doesn't work. People go mad bringing up children. And people go mad helping people die, because the Africans say you need a village to raise a child. And it's absolutely right. And you need a village to help someone die. That's absolutely right. And to have that extended family setup, which I think probably just in the last 50 years we've lost, because the way that the work environment was, that generally you would be born and you would be able to work in the mine, the shipyards, the steel works, whatever industry was around, the family shop, whatever it might be. That's all gone. That's all been taken away. So people are having to leave, having to go elsewhere to find work. Therefore, they're miles away from their parents as their parents get older. And one of the things that I've discovered over the last few years, talking to a lot of people, that so much of the grief that comes from the death of a family member is heightened by guilt and shame, because you weren't there, because you are away working, and so many people I know talking to now with parents in nursing homes or whatever else, and of course we have our own families to take care of as well. And one of the things that I feel most fortunate about in terms of the death of my sister and my grief about that is it's pure. It isn't tinged with any guilt or shame, because I couldn't have done any more. And I think it's the guilt and the shame that actually kill us, and not the grief.
You have this section in the book. I don't really want to read it out, but because you should. But
I haven't got my glasses on.
well, let me then. I mean, you say it got me thinking. We don't speak death in this country, do we? We don't learn it from our parents. We're not taught it at school. It's very rare to find people conversing in it unless they are somehow specialists. When confronted by it, we mumble the couple of stock phrases we've learned, deepest sympathy or condolences. What do you think we should teach our children then about death?
I think we could have as much focus and time spent and commitment as we talk about birth. I know, is it the PSHE, the
Yeah.
kids do it, what is it, 13, 14? About sexual health,
Personal finance, all that kind of
personal
stuff. Bit of
finance,
politics.
all of these things. Bring it in then. Bring it in then. Because I think it can only be healthy. And the fact that I'm talking to people who are very well educated, who will scream, stop it, this is morbid. It's the only thing we know that's going to happen to us. And we have to bring it out into the daylight. That is essential. And one of the things I think that I realized with my sister is that, of course, life, it's just life until the last breath. We tend to want to compartmentalize dying as being something completely other. We're born, we live, and then we die. We want to make little parcels of them all. It is life all the way through, and how someone approaches the end of their life is almost categorically always how they've lived their life. So if you've lived it in a state of denial, you will die in a state of denial.
So you think you can have a good death?
Absolutely. My sister had a good death. She had a good death. She was able to stay in her flat with her cat. She had the most important male in her life at the end of a bell. Of course, she did not choose to die at 51 of a fantastically painful illness. But there was love, and there was kindness, and there was grace. Were we all able to go that way, really? And one of the things as well, which we really have to explore, is where we put people generally at this point in their lives.
When they're dying, because most people die in hospital.
We put them in factories. We put them in factories that are designed to make people better and to send them home. Now, I'm not going to start saying that dying people are bed blocking, but that's not the reason for a hospital. And we really have to be better than that. And we have to be able to look at other ways of doing things. The difficulty now is because there's so little money in the system and the social care budget has been eviscerated. There are, as far as I'm aware, 7 million carers in this country. That's more than 10% of us. Were they all to claim a salary, it would be as much as the NHS budget again. It's that amount of money that they are saving the system. And it is kids caring for parents. It is kids doing the caring and then going to school and trying to do that work. So we have to work out a way of bringing death back into the community. Interestingly, that was the big vibe in childbirth recently, taking childbirth out of hospitals and bringing it back.
Natural childbirth units and all that sort of things.
But bringing it back into your home.
Yeah.
And just very recently, they've said, oh, actually, do you know what? It's actually more trouble than it's worth because we're having to have these roving midwives the whole time, and then things necessarily will go wrong, and then we've got to get an ambulance, and it actually becomes more costly. So they're now saying we can medicalize the childbirth back into hospitals, but we need to do the opposite with death, because generally death is not medical, it's physical. You are dying.
What would you mean? Just explain that.
Hospices are not hospitals. Hospices have a palliative component to them. They are there as much as they're able to reduce pain and therefore to reduce both the physical and the mental suffering of a person who is in the process of dying, however long that may take. But they are not medical institutions. As soon as you put someone into a hospital to die, you are medicalizing the death. Now, of course, there'll be moments when someone's having some cardiac issues within a hospice and they need to go into a unit. There will always be that. But generally, people, when they get to the end game, are just dying, and that is not a medical thing. That is a purely physical and could be dealt with purely palliatively rather than medically. Okay, I was very fortunate with my sis that she died before she got to a point where we were requiring people to come in and administer, because she was catheterized at that point, and the catheter came out, and I couldn't deal with it because I don't know how to deal with that. That other things were being required. That could still all have happened in the flat, but I was finding myself in a position where I couldn't deal with it as gracefully and as competently as I had dealt with all the stuff running up to that moment. But if you have an outreach team, and we were blessed with the Marie Curie, with the Macmillan, with all the outreach people who would come and would support me being able to look after my sister in her space.
So what you're saying is we need to get people out of hospitals as soon as it becomes clear that they are dying,
Yeah.
and we need people who can visit. We need medical staff who can visit people at home and do all the basic stuff that needs to be done.
I don't have the figures, but I would assume that most people who get sent to hospital during the end game don't need to be there. They're just there because they can't be anywhere else. Because there is not the support system, there's not the family support, there's not the caring support or the outreach or whoever it might be. Of course, there will be some folk who will go in for an operation, the operation goes wrong, and then they are dying, and then they die. That's a whole other thing. I'm talking about someone with a life-limiting illness. It is insane sending them to a hospital. And we have to work out what else we can do.
At what point did you and Claire talk about the fact that she was dying?
We didn't.
After she had told you? Didn't?
No. As I said, people die how they lived. She lived in denial. And it was madness on my part thinking that she would change. And my difficulty was that I did all the homework. I read the books. And the problem was that my sister, until literally her last breath, was in denial. I was desperate at all times for whoever was visiting, be it the oncologist or the palliative doctor or the nurses, to be as clear as possible as to where my sister was in the grand scheme of things. And it's one of the things that everyone does when they turn up. They say, how do you think you are? Where do you think you are? And of course the doctor would say these things to my sister, and she would listen, and she'd go, okay. Because the reason she couldn't take herself to the toilet was because her brother hadn't done enough physiotherapy with her. Simple as that. No, the reason she couldn't go to the toilet was because she was full. She had bone cancer, and she had no strength. Her bones were not available for her to stand and to walk and to take herself. And she would hear this from the doctor, and she'd listen, and she'd go, thank you very much. I want a second opinion. But that was her. And that was her, how she had always lived, and that was what made her so extraordinary, is she was a problem solver. She was very high up in a company when she was hale and hearty. And she and I, and one of the things that was most wonderful about our time together, even though we were pushed together in such difficult circumstances, were minute by minute things were changing. Minute by minute we're having to readjust, replan. Right, she can't now drink out of a glass. How do we get her to drink? She's starting to lose that, so we can't use a straw now. Right, we get her this. How can we take her to the toilet? Problem solving, always saying, no, I will not accept that I can't do ... Let's try and find another way. And that's great when it's healthy. When it's pure denial, it's insanity, really. And my biggest problem through the last numbers of weeks was my frustration with my sister because she wasn't doing it properly. And it's one of the reasons why I'm banging on so heavily now, is to try and get people to not only talk about when we're getting to the end game, but to talk a long time before that, when you may have information about a life-limiting illness, or talk before even that around Sunday lunch one day saying, I don't think I want to be resuscitated. I've always really loved the idea of a wicker coffin being buried in a... Whatever it might be, and make this part of a family narrative, that everyone is able to talk openly with everyone else. Now, it's not saying that this is the plan, and I, of course, may change my mind that I would like to be resuscitated, but I think the only tattoo I will ever get is DNR on the front and PTO on the back, really.
I mean, we deal with death a lot in humour, don't we? Or with humour, basically. I mean, that's how a lot of us deal with it. I mean, in my own family, I kind of think, you know, we've been talking about... My dad's been talking about dying for about 40 years, for as long as I can remember, really, since he had a sort of a very mild heart attack when I was a little kid. And so it's always been part of the conversation of sort of, you know, oh, well, I won't be here for very long. And I find myself doing it a little bit myself, you know, sort of slipping into the same, you know, well, when I'm dead and gone, and, you know, you can get on and do that when I'm finished, and, you know, this will finish me off and all the rest of it. But it really feels, again, rather like denial rather than talking about it.
Because, of course, we use humour. Humour's a great obfuscator. We can hide behind that, which is not to say that you can't be funny talking about death, and of course a lot of the things that death brings with it are very funny, are very humorous. We had at my sister's funeral, there was only 7 of us there, her very close 4 close girlfriends and me and our daughter and Em. And we all wanted to put something on the coffin to get cremated with her. And I'd, for the last 3 months of my sister's life, I'd only worn 1 pair of shorts. It was a very hot summer in 2016. And I literally spent the whole summer in a vest and shorts. So, of course, I put my shorts to get cremated with her. And Em had been with Clare at an Ayurvedic clinic in India before she got very ill, and wanted to light a joss stick on the coffin. So she lit a match, and the place went...
In a crematorium?
You cannot have naked flames in a crematorium. I mean, you couldn't write it's bliss. And then, of course, round the back is a bin that says no hot ashes. You know, it's just... you have to be able to laugh. And one of the things about humour, of course, humour is about discomfort. Or pain. We laugh at someone else's pain, the whole banana skin thing. One of the things that I realized that we feel that not talking about it is an act of love. It is actually cruelty. Talking about it is an act of love, as hard as that may be. And the more and more people I talk to, interestingly, a lot of people will say, a lot of older people or people who've had illness or who are in life-limiting illness at the time, I want to talk about it, but my son won't, or my daughter won't. That's a tricky one. That's a tricky one. And I know people who went to, no, my parents, and I go, no, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it. So the parent, the person who is facing the death, is able to, but the child is unable to hear that from their parent, because their parent symbolizes all these things. And of course we know as we get older, that of course our parents are getting, well, we're all getting nearer death, but they're very much getting nearer death. And we want still to be trapped in some form of adolescence or whatever it might be, at the same time as we're wanting to stride on and be our own people. It's this weirdness around it all that can only be cleansed by talking.
I mean, you say in Clare's funeral there were just 7 of you. How important was the sort of saying goodbye bit, and how did that help you process what had happened?
Clare hadn't wanted really anyone around. I think she was embarrassed, and I think that's another thing we need to talk about, the embarrassment of illness, because it takes everything away from the shape that you were. And
your dignity.
The shape that you were was, she was a woman with a big posh car and an embossed business card and a parking space and and earning potential, and she could go out and buy as many shoes as she wanted, and suddenly everything is taken away from you. And I think a lot of it was was shame about the state that she was in, and she was completely destroyed by this. And at the same time, she was able to allow her brother to be the witness.
Well, how do you think we could cope with that better? How would you cope with it better?
Being more open, talking about it more. But the thing about the funeral was because she had really kept everyone at arm's length in a slightly camp way when I was at the funeral directors, and I thought she's not an oak coffin with brass handles kind of girl. She's definitely not wicker. That's too hippie for her. Saw this thing, sent an email off going, they do a disco ball coffin as a laugh, and everyone went, yeah.
What is a disco ball coffin? Is it literally mirrored glass around the coffin?
It's a coffin that has photographs of disco balls, all glinting, and all these weird, wonderful rainbow lights effects coming out. And it's for a disco queen, and she came in on the shoulders of my wife and three of her best friends to Dancing Queen by ABBA, and we all just stood around the coffin. There was no one else there. There was no one in pews. We stood around the coffin and we talked and we cried and we blew our nose and we put the tissues on the coffin and we all brought something to put there and we read things and all the notes that everyone had sent and all the emails I had printed out, these huge amounts of paper put on the coffin. It was an absolute bloody mess. Her flat was a mess. Her flat had the most beautiful design, furniture, gorgeous, covered in nonsense, covered in rubbish, receipts also. So it was perfect that her coffin was an absolute mess when it went out.
What do you think? I mean, you mentioned right at the beginning, the idea of statutory leave, all that kind of stuff. I mean, how should workplaces deal with bereavement? Because, as far as I can tell, it seems to be entirely at the discretion of
the employer.
What they do.
Because there's nothing statutory.
And sometimes they're kind and sometimes they're not.
Yeah. What would be wrong with having it similarly enshrined as time off when you're a new parent? And yet then I suppose a small business would say, well, what do I do? You're probably only going to have 2 kids. You might have 7 people close to you die. Are you going to take 3 months off each? I can't afford that. Yes, we have to get pragmatic, obviously, about things. But I think we shouldn't expect it coming from top down. We also need to expect it coming from bottom up, which is mates, just people. And I know I talk to people who have lost friends because a friend will literally cross the street when they know that you've just been bereaved because they're embarrassed, because they don't know what to talk about.
Well, can you tell us, I mean, in your case, what did you want people to say to you? Because, as you say, I mean, most of the time people say, I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
My condolences. I can't begin to imagine what you're going through.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
What should we say?
There's no shoulds, I don't think. And I think you have to be led by the person who is grieving. Some people will want to be hugged, some people won't want to be touched, some people will want to talk, some people will not want to talk, some people will want just to sit quietly or to be allowed just to cry. Again, I think it's just as bad if we come up thinking we know what you need, someone who's just lost a partner.
But it's about how we get over our fears, isn't it? Because we all do that because we're absolutely terrified of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's not that we don't feel or we don't feel sorry or we don't want to give somebody a hug or whatever. It's just that you just don't want to do the wrong thing, so you don't do anything usually.
Yeah.
Or you don't.
That's why we have to have more conversations like this, because. And we have to have people who hopefully know a bit about stuff to go into schools and to be able to talk within the sexual health about birth and equally about death. We have to see if as a community now, the Irish do it better. The Irish still generally have an open coffin.
You think that's a good idea?
Generally have a wake.
Yes. Seeing the person go.
There'll be old Uncle George in the back room for a couple of days. And folk will keep coming in and out, and we'll have a drink, and we'll talk about Uncle George, and we'll see Uncle George there. Oh, look, he's dead. That helps. That helps us, because our lizard brain at the back can't always comprehend that someone has died and we have to see them. Now, not everyone wants to see a dead body, obviously, but I think it helps. Just talk, and try and be as open as possible and see what the person who is in the midst of the grief requires. And generally, don't bring flowers, bring a roast chicken.
I mean, where are you with your grief with Clare now? Because this is more than 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and I've sat here watching you for, almost an hour, and you obviously still look upset and emotional about it, and it feels very close to the surface. And no wonder when you've been talking about this for over a year.
Yeah.
Has this stopped you grieving, or has it helped you?
I don't. Grief is really interesting. Grief will come up and hit you in the solar plexus when you least expect it. It will come through you like a vomit by the frozen peas section in the supermarket when you're completely unaware. My shape now, the shape I am, the holes I possess from falling out of trees and from power tool accidents and from the breaks of heart and from the deaths of those I love, this is the shape I am. And I'm not pretending that I'm anything other than what I am. The last numbers of months I spent with my sister were an excruciating trauma and an intense privilege at the same time, almost equally. And I realize now that all I knew in the past was post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's only recently I realized that there's post-traumatic growth. More people grow from trauma than are traumatized from trauma, interestingly. And I've felt over the last couple of years that I have changed, not existentially, although that is undoubtedly there, but I've realized that I am able to do certain things that I didn't know I could do, that I'm able just to get up in the morning as well, but that I have undoubtedly grown from this trauma. And one of the things I want to do more than anything is to share that, because I'm fantastically fortunate in the fact that I'm self-employed, that we've paid the mortgage, that I have an understanding family, that I wasn't working at the time and I could drop everything and look after my sister. Very few people are in this situation. I'm not expecting everyone to do what I did, but that there is an ability to be able to do this and not be destroyed by it, actually to grow from it.
That's a very interesting idea, that that a good death can not just be for the person who died, but for the people left behind.
Yeah.
Have you planned out your own? I mean, what's going to happen with you?
I'm actually going to live forever. I'm not going to die.
I think one of the things that is almost essential in the dying process is the people with you. And the last numbers of months with my sister were the most powerful moments of our lives together. And I would not give up a single second of that. And I don't want to deny the people who love me the availability to do that with me. That doesn't mean that I won't decide at one point to say, stop the chemo. Please, who are we trying to kid? And another thing is, very few doctors finish their chemo. They know when to stop.
So does that make you against euthanasia, or just
No,
it's up to people to do whatever they want to do?
That's a whole other argument. That's a whole other argument, really. It's really complicated. It's really complicated. I also looked after my mum the last numbers of months of her life. She had CLL, leukemia, and she would rail. You wouldn't do this to a dog. And I talked to mates who were doctors, and I talked to her doctor, and the day I went to register her death, the day after she died, I bumped into her GP, and I said about this, and I said, we really got to start talking about euthanasia. And her doctor said, your mum had more than enough drugs in her house to kill herself. And she knew that. And she chose not to, because you were there. And again, those last weeks, months with my mum were very healing times in a relationship that had not always been wonderful. That was an extraordinarily potent time.
Are you taking this into your professional world as well? I mean, does it change the way you portray people in this situation? Or, I mean, you've just done the Marie Colvin film about a woman who was killed in Syria.
Well, I played Mountbatten. I don't think it brought a lot in with him.
Are you able to take it into the professional world, or is it?
Look, hopefully everything that happens to you in life invests something in the job you do as an actor, because we're trying to explore the human condition in whatever we do, in whatever piece of work, be it a comedy, a musical, a drama, a tragedy. Of course, unwittingly, I will bring all sorts of stuff in with me. I hope I'm a little bit kinder now, and a bit more compassionate, and hopefully available and interested. I think hopefully I've always been that, but I will find myself going out of my way to talk to people now, to strangers, just stop and chat to folk in the street or whoever it might be, or on a tube, and because I think it's made me more connected with this fabric of existence that we're all weaving and making a mess of. And